I couldn't take my eyes off my daughter. She was curled in the lap of a woman I'd only just met, whispering with all the seriousness of a child. Can you stay forever? I think Daddy needs you too. And in that moment, everything I thought was temporary suddenly felt impossible to let go of. The city at night glittered like a living constellation, every skyscraper a star, every window a fragment of light burning against the darkness. Somewhere high above that restless pulse of taxis, sirens, and midnight conversations stood the tallest tower of them all, its name gleaming across the skyline, Knight International. To the outside world, the man behind the glass fortress was a figure out of legend. Alexander Knight, the cold billionaire CEO, was painted by the media in strokes of admiration and envy. They called him ruthless. They called him brilliant. They called him untouchable. And yet, in the quiet hours after the last boardroom battle was won, when the elevator carried him up toward the penthouse he called home, Alexander often felt the weight of a different truth pressing against his chest. The suits, the speeches, the never-ending acquisitions, those were armor, not identity. Beneath it all, he was not the man of headlines or glowing magazine covers. He was a single father raising a 5-year-old girl who had no idea her giggles were the only thing capable of melting his steel exterior. The elevator doors always opened to silence first, the kind that made his footsteps echo against the marble floor. But then, inevitably, that silence broke. A small voice would carry down the hallway, high-pitched and bubbling with joy. Daddy, Emily, his daughter, his undoing. She would come running, curls bouncing like golden springs, arms outstretched, tiny feet slapping against polished stone with no respect for grandeur. And every time, Alexander's chest would tighten in the same way it did during a hostile takeover or a press ambush, only softer, warmer. He crouched to catch her, and in that simple embrace, skyscrapers and profit margins dissolved into nothing. It was a rhythm he had learned to depend on. The collapse of his professional facade the moment Emily's arms wrapped around his neck. She asked questions that no analyst could prepare him for, questions sharper than any rival's attack. Why don't I have a mommy? Do other kids think it's strange? He answered with gentle words, his tone steady but his heart fractured each time. Some nights, after tucking her into bed, he would stand in the doorway longer than he should, watching her chest rise and fall, wondering if he had given her enough. If his love could fill the emptiness she felt but could not yet name. He had conquered markets, crushed competitors, and expanded his empire until his name was synonymous with success. But this simple fatherhood, left him uncertain, vulnerable, undone. For all the world's wealth and glory, there were nights Alexander Knight, titan of industry, felt like he was losing the only battle that truly mattered, the one for his daughter's heart and happiness. It began with the kind of moment Alexander had learned to fear most. One that looked small on the surface but carried the power to crack open every wall he had built. Emily was sitting cross-legged on the rug in the living room, her tiara sliding down over one eyebrow, crayons scattered like confetti around her coloring book. She hummed a tune to herself, pausing now and then to glance toward him with the kind of focus only a child can give. He had loosened his tie, settled into the armchair with a glass of water, pretending to skim the day's final reports on his tablet. But he wasn't reading. He was watching her, watching the way her little tongue poked out of the corner of her mouth as she concentrated, the way she mixed pink and purple in broad, unapologetic strokes. For a man who negotiated billion-dollar mergers, Alexander never quite knew how to prepare for her questions. Daddy. Her voice was light, but carried that peculiar seriousness that made him lower the tablet at once. Yes, princess. She hesitated, fingers tightening around her crayon, then set it down with a care that made his stomach twist. Why don't I have a mommy? The words hung between them, heavier than silence. Alexander's throat tightened, but he forced his face to remain calm. He had answered this before, in fragments, always with reassurances. Because some families look different. Because you and I are our own team. But tonight, Emily's eyes, wide, trusting, unguarded, did not let him hide behind polished answers. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, she rushed on, her voice earnest and quick, as if she had rehearsed this. It's just, everyone else at school has one. And Miss Carter said there's going to be pictures at the big party. The secretary lady told me about it. People bring mommies and daddies. I don't want people looking at us funny. Alexander sat back slowly, the tablet slipping from his lap, forgotten. The annual corporate gala. The night when every powerful man and woman in the city paraded themselves beneath chandeliers and camera flashes. He had thought little of it. Another performance, another battlefield where perception mattered more than truth. But Emily had overheard, and now her little voice trembled with a plea he had no armor against. "Daddy," she whispered, leaning forward, her curls catching the lamplight, her eyes shining with hope. "Can I have a mommy just for one night? Please? So I don't feel different." Something clenched hard in his chest, sharper than any rival's knife. He forced himself to smile, though it hurt. He reached for her, lifting her gently into his lap, holding her close so she couldn't see the shadow in his eyes. "You'll have someone by your side that night, princess," he murmured, his voice steady because it had to be, his hand smoothing down her hair as if the gesture alone could protect her from every cruel question. She sighed against him, satisfied, already humming again, her little world repaired by his promise. But Alexander sat frozen, his heart pounding, because he knew he had just pledged something he wasn't sure he could deliver. And for the first time in years, the man who could outmaneuver boardrooms and adversaries alike felt truly cornered by the innocent wish of his little girl. The morning after Emily's request, Alexander carried the weight of it into his office like an invisible chain. The city sprawled beneath the glass walls of his corner suite, but even the skyline felt smaller than the sound of his daughter's voice echoing in his memory. "Can I have a mommy just for one night?" He buried himself in contracts, in numbers, in strategy, but the question lingered, seeping into every line of text until letters blurred. By noon, he realized he had read the same paragraph 3 times without comprehension. For a man who prided himself on control, distraction was intolerable. Yet he could not will it away. His assistant, a sharp young woman named Harper, noticed. She hovered by the doorway with her clipboard, uncertain, before finally asking, "Sir, is something wrong?" Alexander almost dismissed her. Habit told him to keep his private life sealed tight. But then Emily's face flashed before him, and the shame of breaking a promise gnawed at him. He exhaled slowly, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "There's the gala. I need someone, a companion, just for that night." Harper blinked, surprised, but caught herself quickly. "Of course. Do you have someone in mind?" The question stung more than it should. He didn't. The truth was, since Emily's mother had left, Alexander had never allowed another woman close enough to matter. His life had become business and fatherhood, nothing more. "No," he admitted quietly. "I don't." There was a pause. Harper shifted her weight, her voice cautious. "I know a service. Discreet. They provide professional escorts for events. Women trained to handle the kind of attention galas attract. It's common, actually. Many in your circle use them." The word escort made his jaw tighten. It clashed with every instinct he had. He was Alexander Knight. He did not borrow affection, did not stage intimacy. But then, Emily's words returned, as piercing as the night she'd spoken them. "So I don't feel different." He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as silence stretched. Every part of him resisted. Yet another part, the part that tucked Emily into bed, the part that couldn't stand to see her eyes clouded with uncertainty, knew there was no alternative. "Arrange it," he said finally, the words clipped, reluctant. Harper nodded quickly, though her eyes softened. "Yes, sir. I'll make the call today." When she left, Alexander sat motionless, fingers curled against the desk as though he had just signed a contract with himself he could never undo. He told himself it was only for one night, a temporary facade to shield his daughter from questions she was too young to carry. But beneath that logic simmered something else, a quiet, unwelcome shame. For all his wealth and power, Alexander Knight, who had bought out rivals, reshaped industries, and built an empire with his bare hands, could not give his daughter the one thing she wanted most. So he would hire it, counterfeit it, package it for a single night. And he hated himself for it. The night of the gala arrived draped in velvet darkness, the city humming with anticipation. From his penthouse window, Alexander watched as chauffeured cars threaded through the streets below like beads of light, each one carrying a polished couple destined for the same ballroom. His own limousine idled at the entrance, the driver waiting patiently. Yet he lingered by the glass, a man caught between two worlds, one of power, one of fragile fatherhood. In the next room, Emily twirled before a mirror, her pale pink gown rustling around her ankles, a tiara gleaming in her hair. She pressed her palms against her cheeks and giggled, delighting in her reflection. "Daddy, do I look like a princess?" Alexander stepped into the doorway, his throat tightening. "You look like the princess," he said softly, and the truth of it nearly undid him. And then, beside her, stood the woman. The girlfriend for the night, as Harper had phrased it when confirming the arrangement. Alexander had braced himself for someone lacquered in glamour, a polished surface with little beneath. He expected a stranger who would smile for cameras, sip champagne, and vanish with the dawn. But when his eyes met hers, time faltered. She was radiant, yes, but not in the rehearsed way he had imagined. There was a warmth in her gaze that startled him, an ease in the way she carried herself. She knelt before Emily without hesitation, lowering herself so that their eyes were level. "Hello, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice soft as silk yet threaded with sincerity. "I'm Lily, and I must say, you look like the most beautiful princess I've ever seen." Emily's laughter rang out, clear and bright, as though she had been waiting for this stranger all along. She slipped her small hand into Lily's as naturally as if it belonged there. Alexander stood frozen, his composure, the armor that had never failed him in public, fracturing in the most unexpected way. He had prepared himself for pretense, for artifice. Instead, what he saw was connection. Genuine, effortless, disarming. For a moment, he almost spoke, an instinct to reclaim control. But the sight of Emily leaning into Lily, her trust given freely and without caution, silenced him. His daughter, who asked the questions that gutted him, who feared being different, had already chosen. He adjusted his cufflinks with deliberate calm, masking the storm inside him. "We should go," he said, his voice even. Yet when Lily glanced up at him, smiling not with seduction but with quiet assurance, he felt something shift deep within. The marble floors of the lobby echoed beneath their steps as they descended together. Alexander, his daughter, and the woman who had entered their lives as a hired role, but who carried herself as if she had belonged from the beginning. The limousine rolled to a stop before the Grand Hotel, its facade blazing with golden light. Photographers lined the red carpet entrance, cameras raised like weapons ready to capture every slip of expression. For years, Alexander had walked through this same gauntlet alone, his face a mask of indifference, his name a headline magnet. Tonight, though, was different. Tonight, Emily sat beside him in her pink gown, her tiara gleaming under the passing flashes. And Lily, composed, serene, completed the picture that was never meant to exist. When the car door opened, the sound struck first, the rush of voices, the clicking shutters, the swell of music from within the ballroom. Alexander stepped out with his usual precision, but when he turned to help Emily down, it was Lily who had already bent gracefully, offering her hand to the little girl. Emily climbed out smiling, tiara slightly askew, and clutched Lily's hand as though they were bound by something stronger than introductions. The crowd noticed. Whispers rippled. Alexander Knight brought someone. And a child? Who is she? The speculation buzzed like static, but for the first time in years, Alexander felt the weight of those stares lessen. He was not alone in the spotlight. Inside, chandeliers blazed like captive starlight, crystal drops scattering brilliance across marble floors. The music of violins floated in the air, polished and precise. Waiters glided with trays of champagne and silver-plated hors d'oeuvres. Every powerful figure in the city seemed present, conversations weaving into a tapestry of ambition and intrigue. Alexander usually approached such gatherings as battlefields, measuring rivals, silencing whispers, projecting strength. Tonight, however, his attention shifted again and again to the two figures at his side. Lily crouched to Emily's level, showing her how to balance the tiny fork of an appetizer plate, laughing when she mispronounced creme brulee. She guided her gently through the sea of adults, making space where none existed, shielding her from the press of the crowd with effortless grace. Alexander watched, stunned, as his daughter's shoulders relaxed in this glittering world that had never been meant for her. And stranger still, he felt himself relax, too. The mask he had worn so long eased without his permission. He found himself smiling, Not the rehearsed smile of photographs, but something unguarded, almost foreign. At one point, Emily tugged at Lily's hand and, without hesitation, climbed into her lap when they settled in a quiet corner. Lily held her with ease, adjusting the tiara, listening with rapt attention to whatever story Emily spun. The sight rooted Alexander where he stood, his chest tight with an emotion he dared not name. For years, he had moved through rooms like this one, surrounded by admirers, enemies, competitors, yet profoundly alone. Tonight, for the first time, he felt something different, not the chill of isolation, but the warmth of belonging. And all because of a woman who was supposed to be nothing more than a facade, and a little girl who believed she could wish for forever. The gala had thinned into a softer rhythm. The speeches were done, the music subdued, conversations drifting into quieter corners. Alexander found himself standing apart for once, watching instead of calculating, his gaze locked on the small miracle unfolding before him. Emily had grown tired of the endless introductions and the tall glasses of sparkling water she pretended were champagne. She had curled into Lily's lap, her pink gown pooling like a cloud around them, her tiara slipping sideways once more. Lily adjusted it gently, brushing a strand of golden curl back into place. Alexander should have turned away, should have rejoined the circle of investors waiting for his attention, but he could not. He saw something he had not expected to see all night, or any night. His daughter safe, content, wholly at ease in someone else's arms. Lily leaned down, whispering something that made Emily giggle, her little shoulders shaking with laughter. And then, just as quickly, the laughter faded into seriousness. Emily's small hands reached up, cupping either side of Lily's face with the innocent boldness of a child who has never learned restraint. "Can you stay forever?" she whispered, her voice soft yet certain. "I think Daddy needs you too." Alexander's breath caught. He had faced hostile takeovers, depositions, betrayals, and scandals without blinking. But these few words nearly stopped his heart. Lily's eyes widened slightly, her lips parting as if to respond, but she glanced toward Alexander instead. Their eyes met across the space between them, and in that look something unspoken passed. A question, a recognition, a truth neither dared voice. Alexander's composure threatened to fracture completely. His instinct screamed to retreat, to fold back behind the walls he had built since the day Emily's mother walked out. Yet another instinct, quieter, older, buried deep, ached to surrender. To believe, if only for a moment, that his daughter's wish was not impossible. He forced his hands into his pockets to hide the tremor in them, his jaw tightening as he looked away. Around him, the gala continued. The swirl of gowns, the clink of glasses, the low hum of conversation, but he heard none of it. Only Emily's whisper echoed, reverberating against every scar he had hidden beneath success. It was supposed to be one night, one arrangement, one facade. And yet, watching his daughter nestled against Lily as though she had known her all her life, Alexander felt a dangerous shift. The kind of shift that could undo a man who had sworn never to let anyone too close again. Just when Alexander thought the night might pass quietly, a voice slid into the air like oil on water. Well, night. Alexander turned, already bracing himself. Richard Hale stood a few feet away, a glass of scotch in hand, his smile sharp as a blade. Of all the men in the room, Richard was the one who lived to see Alexander falter. Where Alexander built, Richard schemed. Where Alexander guarded, Richard prowled. Their rivalry was the sort that made headlines. Two titans locked in an endless duel. Tonight, Richard's gaze flicked from Alexander to Lily, then to the little girl drowsing against her shoulder. His smirk deepened. "Didn't expect to see you parading a family." Bold move, though some would call it desperate. Alexander's instincts sharpened. Normally, he would respond with a curt dismissal, a lethal remark calculated to end the exchange. But before he could speak, Lily rose slightly in her seat, adjusting Emily with practiced care, and turned her calm gaze toward Richard. "Desperate?" she repeated softly, her tone more curious than offended. Her smile was gentle, almost amused. "I thought it was called being human. But perhaps that word doesn't circulate in your vocabulary." The barb was cloaked in silk, but it landed cleanly. Several nearby guests, drawn by the scent of confrontation, chuckled behind their glasses. Richard's smirk faltered, just for a breath. He recovered quickly, Of course, men like Richard always did. Ah, witty too. Alexander, where did you find this one? She's wasted on you. Lily tilted her head, her smile unwavering. Not wasted, Mr. Hale. Invested. That's what Alexander does best, isn't it? The laughter this time was louder, more pointed. Richard's jaw tightened, the muscles ticking as he raised his glass in a mock toast, retreating into the crowd with a stiff nod. Alexander stood rooted, his usual composure shaken, not by Richard's words, but by Lily's. He had expected her to shrink back, to play the role with silence. Instead, she had stepped neatly into the arena he lived in daily, and she had not only held her ground, but turned the field to her advantage. When she looked back at him, there was no triumph in her expression, no gloating. Only that same quiet warmth, as though deflecting a rival's mockery had cost her nothing at all. She lowered her gaze to Emily again, brushing a curl from the little girl's forehead, as if that were the only battle worth fighting tonight. And in that moment, Alexander realized the truth he had resisted since the evening began. Lily was not just shielding Emily from awkward questions. She was shielding him too, protecting him from the loneliness he had carried so long, from the sharp edges of a world that never forgave weakness. It unsettled him. It humbled him. And for the first time in years, it gave him something dangerous: hope. The night ended not with applause or headlines, but with silence. Thick, gentle, almost sacred. The limousine purred through the city streets, its tinted windows shutting out the chaos of traffic and flashing lights. Inside, the glow of passing street lamps drifted over the three of them, painting soft stripes of light and shadow. Emily was asleep, curled in Lily's arms. Her tiara had slipped off entirely, resting in her lap, forgotten. Her small head nestled against Lily's shoulder, lips parted in the deep, trusting sleep of a child who felt safe. Lily held her carefully, one hand stroking golden curls in a rhythm that was both tender and instinctive, as if she had been doing it for years. Alexander sat across from them, his posture rigid, but inside he was unraveling. He had told himself all day that this arrangement was temporary, nothing more than a performance. Yet now, watching the scene before him, he felt emotions rise that he had long since buried. Guilt, because Emily deserved more than a rented promise. Fear, because allowing someone into their world meant risking the heart he had fortified with steel. And something else too, quieter, sharper. Hope, the kind of hope he had sworn he no longer believed in. He studied Lily in the half-light. The curve of her smile as she looked down at Emily, the patience in her movements, the ease with which she belonged in a space that had never welcomed strangers. She was supposed to be a facade. Instead, she had become something he could not define. The car slowed as it approached his building, the tower rising like a sentinel against the night sky. When the driver opened the door, Lily shifted carefully, carrying Emily as though she weighed nothing. In the penthouse, she laid the little girl in her bed with quiet grace, tucking the blankets close. And then, without fanfare, without being asked, she bent to whisper a lullaby, soft and sure, as though the song had been waiting for this very moment. Alexander stood in the doorway, silent. The man who had built empires, who could dominate a boardroom with a single word, could only watch as Lily soothed his daughter with a tenderness he himself struggled to express. For the first time in years, he felt less like a CEO and more like a man, raw, vulnerable, human. When Lily straightened and turned, her expression was composed but gentle. She moved toward the door, her voice polite, professional, as though folding the night neatly back into its boundaries. "Thank you for the evening, Mr. Knight. I'll leave you now." He could have let her go. He should have. That was the arrangement. One night, nothing more. But as she reached the threshold, something in him broke past the walls he had spent years constructing. His voice came low, unsteady, carrying the weight of all the things he could not yet say. "Would you come again tomorrow?" Lily paused, startled. He forced himself to continue, his gaze steady though his chest ached. "Not for me. For her. For Emily. Always for Emily." For a moment, silence lingered. Then Lily met his eyes, and in her smile there was no judgment, no mockery. Only understanding, perhaps deeper than his own. She nodded once, gently, and Alexander knew, with a clarity that terrified him, that one night had already changed everything.